Okay, let's get started. I'm posting homework tonight. As a matter of fact, I think it's posted already. And it's due on Monday. So you got all weekend to work on it. Not that long of an assignment.
Is it over mutual funds?
Yes, it is. Today is the 18th, so we're finishing chapter 13 today. We have an in-class at the end of the class, so I hope I don't go past 3:30. If you look next week, Monday's chapter 12 stocks, Wednesday's chapter 12 stocks. The following week, Monday, we just do a little bit of chapter 3 taxes. 2 weeks from today is your third quiz. Time's flying by. Yes?
Is that going to cover chapter 3? The little bit that we...
Yes. Whatever we cover from the second quiz to the third quiz would be on it. You know, if for some reason we slow down and we don't get to chapter 3, then it wouldn't be on it. What else? Let's see. Investopedia. Rod is in first place again still. I don't know if he's dropped down. I wasn't paying attention over the weekend. My basement flooded over the weekend, so my vacation was spending most of it getting stuff out of the basement so it could dry out.
Did your sub pump stop working?
Sub pump stopped working, and I didn't know it, so it may have been going for... I went down there on Sunday and stepped into the basement, into a puddle of water, going, wow, what's going on? I couldn't even see. I couldn't even tell there was water in it. It was about 3 inches. So, Jacob's not here. I was going to ask him about what he got him into second place, but as you can see here, Apple did it for him. And I wanted to see when he bought his Apple. So I looked back here at his history. You can see he's had a few transactions. And it looks like he bought Apple at first on September 27th at $154, 14 shares. But then, let's keep going here, on October 4th, bought 20 more shares because the price had gone down a little. That was a great idea, to buy more because the price went down. Where a lot of people will go, oh my God, I'm losing money, and panic and sell. Sometimes the best idea is just say, okay, I'll double down if it's gone down. It's got to head back up eventually, and that's what's paid off for him. It's made, what percent's that? I got to move it. 4%. 4%. Some of it since September 27th, and some of it just only 2 weeks ago. 4% increase. What should you do with that kind of, making that kind of a gain in such a short period of time? Maybe sell half. That's right. Get some of it off there if you have that big of a gain. Always look at the percentage. That's how you really know how it did, because you could have only $2,000 in one investment and $5,000 in another. You may have made more money on the $5,000, but the $2,000 is which one has the biggest percent increase is the one you got to keep an eye on, because usually if something has a big percent increase, it's got to head back down eventually, and you want to be out of it before it heads down, at least half of it out of it. All right. Just brought up a chart of it. He caught it right on a dip. Whoops, where's October 4th? Right there on that dip is where he bought that second set of shares. And it's been going up since. We've talked about Apple a lot in this class. Let's see, where are we? No, wait. Let's do this. Okay, hypothetically. Sometimes you get these checks in the mail. Looks like this. But always, when they send you this by law, they got to send you this. It looks familiar, doesn't it? Less boxes, but the boxes are still there. So this law passed in the 60s. And ever since then, it's a clear decision what that credit card is trying to offer you. Let's pretend, if you look at this, that I went ahead and wrote one of those checks out to pay off one of my other credit cards. I wrote it out for $2,000. And for the next 6 months, I made the minimum payment. And then I paid it off. Let me repeat what I said, because the question is, how much did it cost me in fees and interest for this whole transaction if I write the check for $2,000, pay off the other credit card, make the minimum payment for the next 6 months, and then I paid the rest off in full? How much did it cost me? Not how much I paid, how much in interest and fees did it cost me? And someone help me out with the calculation. What number do I want to use? Not all at once. What percent? 3%. 3% he's saying. So I'm going to switch that to 0.03. What am I multiplying times 3%? The amount that I wrote the check for. Okay, what is wrong with this pen? 2,000 times 3%, let's see. 1% would be 20, is that $60? $60. What about, now there's our fee. What about our interest? For the 6-month period, making those minimum payments. How much? I can't hear you. 0. Nothing. Says, it says 0% all the way till September of next year. So,
Isn't it a balance transfer though, so wouldn't it be 5%?
wait a minute. What is she saying there? No, it's $5 or 3%.
No, go
Let's see,
down.
it's overall either $5 or 3% on each transaction, whichever is greater. The standard balance transfer, if you were not during the promotional period, the standard would be 5%. But using these checks during this promotional period, 3%, $60. It's so hard to make 3% on the money in that 6-month period, let's say, that I would never do this. And you should use it. You'd lose money on the deal. Because we're heading to where that fee, before the financial crash, every one of them that were coming in were 0% interest and 0 fee. Cost you nothing to do the transaction I told you. So by the time you graduate, they're going to be back to that. And they're going to be throwing money at you. Once you're using one credit card, which you should be starting soon to build the credit up. Right? I said use that credit card. Did anybody stop for gas in the last several days? Anybody? Okay. If you would have used a credit card, if you didn't, instead you took cash probably and paid for it maybe, a lot of you. And if you would have used that credit card, and then take the cash, set it aside, pretend it's not your cash, don't touch it, the credit card bill comes in. You now pay that bill with that cash, or you deposit the cash to write the check, or deposit the cash to get online and pay it online with the routing number and account number, or however you pay it. If you get in that habit, because it doesn't cost you anything to do what I just said, by the time you graduate, your credit score will be so high that they'll be throwing money at you. So please, if you haven't started doing that, we talked about this in week 1. Consider starting that off. No matter what, as long as there's no annual fee on the credit card, even if it says it's 19%, you're not going to pay any interest on it because you're going to pay it off in full every single month with the cash you set aside. So it's not going to cost you anything to build the credit score up now while you have the chance. Anyway, so there's that. Let's get back. You know on the final you're going to have a question again about, here's the credit card disclosure, you're writing a check for $2,000, you're making the minimum payment for 6 months, then you're paying it off, what's the total amount in fees and interest? You had that, I think, on quiz 1, and you're going to have it again on your final, because in real life, you got to make this decision. I have to make it twice a week. Twice a week, I'm opening one of these up, if not more often, trying to figure out if this is something I want to do, something to take advantage of. So, and you will too. So you've got to get used to these. You just jump to that page where the boxes are. You don't even read anything else. And if those boxes look interesting, now you start looking at the rest of it. You go to those boxes, it's charging 3% fee, rip it up, throw it away, wait for the next one in a couple days. Making money on mutual funds. The reason this is a big deal is because most people who have never experienced mutual funds are not familiar with the difference between capital gain distribution and capital gains. Those are two separate things. So if you notice on our list of subjects, I have dividends, capital gain distributions, and capital gains. Two separate things, even though the same words are there. So you went ahead and by the way, when you're doing these mutual funds through your retirement plan at work, the dividends, the capital gain distributions, and the capital gains always get put into your retirement account. You don't get sent a check in the mail. Just your retirement account gets a little bigger because you're getting this money added to your account. But let's say you were doing a mutual fund outside of your retirement with your savings, because you got some savings now and you got your emergency fund and you want to get into investing, but maybe not take the risk of individual stocks. You want to buy some mutual funds so you can be diversified. And all of a sudden you'll get this letter in the mail because you've owned it for 3 months or something. And it'll be a check. And you'll look at it and go, dividend check. wow, where did this $30 check come from? What's the deal with this? It means the mutual fund was invested in some stocks that pay dividends. And when the mutual fund gets dividends, the shareholders get their portion of the dividends mailed to them in a check. Unless you check a box when you first set up the investment that says, reinvest my dividends. Then instead of getting a check, they send you a notice telling you how many more shares you now own because they reinvested your dividends. Because you said so. I want to tell you, historically, I've always had the dividends sent to me, and then I'll reinvest them myself, because if you wait a couple of days, the prices of per share are a little lower than they would have been if they've done it for you. So I always take advantage of that, even though maybe only a gain of a couple of dollars by doing it this way. It's worth it to me. I'm that cheap. I go after everything. Now that's dividends. Now another couple months go by and you get a check in the mail again. And you go, what is this check? Another $40. What's going on here? That means that mutual fund you're in, there were shares that have what's called capital gain distributions. And so because what happened was the manager of the mutual fund was buying stocks and selling stocks for more than what was paid for, so it earned a capital gain. And that capital gain gets distributed to the shareholders once every 3 months or once every 6 months, depending on the mutual fund. And so that's your share of the capital gains because of buying and selling stocks or bonds within the mutual fund, by the mutual fund manager. And you've got to pay taxes on this money if it's outside of your retirement. If you're in the same mutual fund within your retirement, you're not paying taxes on that money until you take the money out of the retirement after you retire, or after you're 59 and a half. Then, whenever you take it out, you have to pay taxes on the money. But your personal investments, these checks, you're going to get what looks like a W-2 at the end of the year, or the following year, in January and February when you get your work W-2s, you get one from the mutual fund company that says, here's how much your dividends were for the year, report it on your taxes, it even tells you where to report it. Here's how much your capital gains were for the year because you own some mutual funds, report it, tells you. It kind of breaks them up into categories. But then, this last one, called capital gains, not the word distribution after that. That's very different than the other two. That's when you decided to sell shares of the mutual fund and you sold them for more than what you paid for them. And that difference in price is called a capital gain. So it wasn't where they're mailing you a check. You said, you know what, I've made some money off this mutual fund. I'm going to sell my shares because I'd like to get into a different mutual fund. That's fine. Whenever, you could have held it for 5 years, 10 years. The year you decide to sell the shares is the year you have to pay taxes on any money you make because you sold it for more than what you bought it for, because the share price went up. So that's called the capital gain, and that's a big deal, because this is usually the biggest amount of money you're making off the mutual fund, is that one right there, because you sold it for more at a price higher than what you bought it for. So this one is subject to the most tax, unless you held it long enough. So I'm jumping to, is that the last one? Now, second from the last one, short-term versus long-term capital gains. So I'm going to slide 26. Let's say you got your emergency fund, you've been working at your job a few years, you're now saving money, you're getting into investing, you want to make some real money off your money because you got your emergency fund set aside, and you start having these capital gains because you're selling things for a higher price than what you bought them for. You're going to be subject to the tax at whatever your income tax level's at because of your income. Let's say it's at 28% or 33%. That will be the tax on that gain unless, here it is right here. Where's the length of time? Doesn't even say the length of time here. Length of time determines if you can get a tax discount. The key is 1 year. 1 year. Just like the liabilities on a balance sheet, whether short-term or long-term, was based on 1 year, how you're taxed on the money you make on your mutual funds and your stocks and any investment is all based on whether you owned it for a year or not. If you owned it for 1 day, over a year or longer, you get a huge discount on the taxes. You could be in the 33% tax bracket or the 28% tax bracket. And if you owned it for less than a year, that's what you're paying in taxes. But if you owned it for a day, over a year or longer, your tax on the gain, now all the gain, is down to 15%. You've just lowered your tax significantly. If you're in the 33 and it goes down to 15, you've cut your tax in more than half. And so that's a big, big deal. When you're thinking about selling some investments, you always want to look at, when did I purchase it? And every website you work with on your investments will always have on there, when you're checking out your investments, or even sometimes on your statements, the date you purchased it. And you're looking to see, was it more or less than a year ago? And you should only sell the ones that you've held on to for longer than a year because of that huge tax savings. If you have to sell your investments at all, that would be the ones to sell. Even if you're in a 28% tax bracket, you go down to 15, that's, what is that, 13% savings in your pocket instead of giving it up in taxes because you sold one that you owned longer than a year instead of one you owned shorter than a year. That's huge. Big advantage. All right, we're going back up to slide 26. We're on 26. And when I go to page 444, that's what it is. Anybody have the book, go to page 444 and circle this calculation, because there's no doubt it's going to be on your next quiz. Hint, hint. There it is, top of the page, figure it out, it says, the name of it. Now, if you're being asked about how much you made on a mutual fund profit, the words are always used total return amount, which is basically the profit. How much did you get in return for being investing in that mutual fund, and how much did you invest? And then it's however much profit divided by how much you had to invest to make that profit to get the percentage. Now, I just got done telling you there's three ways to make profit on a mutual fund. There's the dividends you got while you owned it, the capital gain distributions you received while you owned it, and then there's the selling price maybe being higher than what you bought it for a price, called the capital gain. And it's all about all of those added together. Some mutual funds only have two of them. Some mutual funds only have one of the three. Some have all three. So this story happens to be an example where all three are present in this mutual fund. I have to read it from here. I can't see it from there. It says, let's see, we define total return, blah, 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 calculate, blah, blah, blah. Here we go. You take the income dividends from the mutual fund, the dividend checks you got, the capital gain distributions, and you add the change in share price, because hopefully you sold it for a higher price than what you bought it for, and that's what gives you your total profit, or return on investment is called. And then you're going to take that amount and divide it by the amount you invested to turn it into a percentage, point something. For example, let's assume you owned 100 shares of Majestic Growth Mutual Fund, and you bought it for $12.20 a share. There's your purchase price, 100 shares. You now know exactly how much you invested to get into this mutual fund, because it's a no-load. You didn't have to pay the fees to get in. There's the amount invested, which you're going to need to get that percentage. Then it says, there it gives it to you, the total invested, $1,220. During the next 12 months, 1 year, you received an income dividend of 20 cents and a capital, 20 cents per share, by the way, 20 cents for each share owned, and then a capital gain distribution of 30 cents per share, each share owned. So there's money you got. You got a check in the mail, got another check. Real quick, how much was the first check? 20 cents times however many shares everybody owns, which is how many shares in this case? 100, so how much? $20. Capital gain distribution, a check came for 30 cents for every share you owned. You owned how many shares? 100, so times 30 cents is how much money? $30. So there's $20 plus $30, there's $50 we made, and then we sold it. And how much time's gone by? 1 year, exactly. So it makes the calculation real easy. It says, and we sold it for $13.40. To figure out that last part, you take what you sold it for minus what you bought it for, and the difference is the capital gain. not the distribution, but the capital gain. So sure enough, 1340 minus 1220 was a profit of $1.20 for every share you bought and sold, times 100 shares. There's your biggest gain, $120, plus the 30, plus the 20. We made $170 off that investment in 1 year. Well, that's great, but how much did you have to invest? What does that mean as far as a percentage? Just like when we're looking at Investopedia, we're looking at the percentages, not the amount. You know, $170 means a lot if you only invested a small amount of money, but if you invested a ton of money, $170 isn't a big deal. You've got to convert it to a percentage to see exactly how well you did. So you take the 170, top of the other page, divided by the initial investment to get in the investment. How much was spent? Well, we bought the 100 shares at $12.20, so that's $1,220. 170 divided by 1,220 is 0.139. I'll take that answer. If you want to convert it to a percentage, multiply it times 100, or just move the decimal 2 places, then add the percent sign. Just don't put 0.139%, because that's not true. You calculated 0.139, stop there. If you have troubles with the whole percent thing, stop there. It happens to be, though, 13.9%. Well, that's really good. Because if somebody said, I'm going to take this $1,220 and put it in a savings account, they would make maybe 1/2 of 1%, maybe. Instead of, they said, I'm going to take some risk in some mutual fund, which was risky, but they diversified by being in a mutual fund, which meant they probably had little bits and pieces of 60 different shares of companies, and they were able to make 13.9% on their money. That's a great return. And that's what it's like when you take the risk most of the time. But when things get weird, like we happen to be in a real weird time right now, people can lose money and lose it fast. Do you realize that since this class has started, the stock market overall has hit record highs maybe a half a dozen times already? Record, ever, in history. When the stock market keeps going up to the point that it's hitting record highs, that's a sign that it's got to come back down. It just keeps going. And it's just going to take one little thing to trigger it, whatever it may be. A really bad earthquake, some kind of bomb going off somewhere in the world, craziness as that would be. Something. And that will trigger it, because it's like a stretched rubber band saying, I'm about to break, but I got a little more in me. I'm about to break, I got a little more in me. Oh, what? We just ran into something? So be careful in this investment game. Remember, you got to look at this as a short-term strategy. In real life, you shouldn't worry so much about it. You're young, you just started your career, and the money in there, if the market crashes, I'm going to keep working for the next 30 years, right? You're all going to be in your 20s or 30s. I'm going to keep working for the next 20, 30 years. I'll get it back and then some. And that's what happened with everybody who lost all that money in 2008 when the crash took place. They've gotten their money back and then some at this point. But as you get older, you don't have the time to get it back. And you got to start realizing that as you get older and say, I'm not going to take as much risk as I did when I was in my 20s and 30s. Now I'm not going to risk so much. I'm going to get into less risky investments and only risk small percentages of it. And as you get older, you get in your 60s, very small percent in the stock market. The rest is in very conservative investments, like just bonds or certificate of deposit. It's all about protecting the nest egg as you get older, so the money's there so you can actually quit your job and know you have enough money to live in any senior center you want to live in, if you even want to. That's a whole other story. There's the calculation. Here's the reference. Now, let's pretend for a second that this investment didn't pay capital gain distributions. There's nothing different other than you're not adding that $30 right there. Just means only 2 of them are there and now the third one. I'm bringing that up because I think the homework may not have one of these, but you have this going on, but maybe it didn't do a capital gain distribution or something. So that page is important. All right, where are we going now? We're going to, page 427. No, not 427. Yeah, 427. Very simple calculation. I probably didn't even need to show you it, but I want to make sure you're ready for it. Right there on the right, sales charge calculation. Another word for that would be front-end load calculation. The first time you start investing, you probably forgot everything you learned in this class almost, except for the word diversification, I hope, and how to increase your credit score. Other than that, you may forget everything. And so you'll go to a financial advisor maybe the first time you want to invest. And when you get your first statement, there's going to be a sales commission charge because that's how the person that's advising you gets paid, in most cases. And the question, if this was on a quiz, is going to say, you went to a investment advisor, and you got into Davis Opportunity Mutual Fund, and that particular mutual fund charges 4.75% front-end load, or sales commission charge. It means the same thing. It's basically a commission going to the person who advised you. What would be the amount of money coming out of your initial investment that will be going to that charge? You just take however much is being invested. In this case, the investor wants to invest $10,000 times that percentage that's given in the story. So I always turn it into a decimal. 4.75% would be 0.0475 times 10,000. $475 comes off the top initially that won't even be invested into the mutual fund. It's coming off the top before the shares are bought. If the question says how much of the 10,000 is truly invested, you just subtract the commission of $475 from 10,000. And the difference, 9,525, is the amount out of the 10,000 that got invested. Pretty easy calculation. And I know that's on your homework, I think, or you're in class. All right, next. We're going to slide 11. Anybody printed? Remember I was talking about family of funds, how if you're hopefully get to a point to where you can use a no-load investment company, you can avoid those sales charges, the back-end charge. Did we talk about deferred? Did I pass right by deferred sales? I did. Hang on now, passed by the other one. That was page 428. We're going back, sorry. Forgot, there's one more. What if you go to an advisor that gets you into a mutual fund that says, no, you're not getting charged any commission to get in this mutual fund, and then you go to get money back out of it? It's called a deferred. Back-end load is the common name, back-end load, as you're getting out. Investment advisors love these because they usually get a bigger commission because the mutual fund, over the time you've had it in there, has gotten bigger. So maybe you invested $6,000, but now it's worth 6,000 something. They get the percentage off everything you're taking out of it instead of what you put in, which is usually a bigger number. In this example, get the lamp back in here. In this example, it says, let's say you got into this mutual fund through a financial advisor, the Oppenheimer Capital Income Fund. Now look at the name there, Income Fund. You're about to learn that you can tell what kind of a mutual fund this is just by those key words, Income Fund. And it says that you're in what's called a B share. The word B share just means it has a commission at the end, in the back. And you're going to withdraw $6,000. And it says, and you're going to withdraw that only after being in this mutual fund 1 year. If you purchase shares into this contingent deferred sales load, contingent deferred means it's being charged as you take money out instead of putting it in. Back-end load. You must pay 5% fee for any money that was withdrawn in the first year. A lot of them will say any money withdrawn in the first 5 years, first 4 years. They have all their different rules. This person's taking $6,000 out of the mutual fund after only being in 1 year. And the commission is 5%. So you just take the amount being withdrawn times that percentage, 0.05, you get $300. If the question says how much will the check be that arrives at your house, if you're withdrawing $6,000 and it's a back-end load, you multiply it times the 5%, and you get $300, then subtract it from the $6,000 because you'll never see the $300. You're just going to get a check for $5,700, the difference. So it's going to ask you either how much the fee is or how much the check's going to be after the fee's taken out. Now, let's get to the names. We're starting with stock funds. These are some, they have different words in the name, but these are some of the common words within the names of them and what these words mean. Notice that one we just talked about in the example said income fund. If the word equity were with the words income fund, that would mean that that mutual fund manager is mainly focused on stocks to bring into the portfolio of the mutual fund that are paying dividends. So that's where the word income. The word equity means stocks. Equity means stocks. Income means income from the stocks, which would be dividends being paid. And when the dividends get paid to the mutual fund then takes the dividends and splits them up among the shareholders. Hey, we got $2 million in dividends. There's 20,000 shareholders. Based on the percent that each of the whole mutual fund that they own, they get that percent of the $2 million. And you'll get a check in the mail for $30 or something like that. Or you'll have it reinvested. Aggressive growth. This is a stock fund where the mutual fund manager is focusing on small companies that are fast growing. They're in the process of, they happen to be in an industry that's growing fast. They're an innovative company. They're trying to grow fast. They're small still, so they're usually considered pretty risky. And the word aggressive growth will be somewhere in the name of the mutual fund. These are all listed in your book, by the way. Just so you know, there's a couple places you can find them. Global stock fund. This means that this mutual fund manager is buying stocks from companies that are in the U.S. and other countries. Not just U.S., not just other countries, but both. That's where the global comes in. Growth fund. This mutual fund manager is buying stocks from companies that are in higher than average revenue and earnings growth. Very similar to the aggressive growth, but this growth is more of companies that are mid-size or larger, where that one, the aggressive growth, are the smaller companies. And usually smaller companies are considered a little more risky than investing in medium or larger size companies. We're going to talk about index funds on its own, so we'll skip that one. International fund. The mutual fund manager is investing in stocks on companies other than the United States, outside the United States. Large cap. This mutual fund manager is buying stocks from companies that have what's called a capitalization of $10 billion or more. Capitalization, I almost forgot, is number of shares outstanding, meaning that are owned by investors, times the price per share. You took all the shares that are out there owned by investors from a company, multiply it by their current price, and that adds up to, and that multiplies out to $10 billion or more, they're considered a large capitalization type of company. Mid cap, you do that same calculation, the number of shares times that price that's out there. It's basically how much ownership's worth. Than that, and it adds up and it multiplies out to $2 to $10 billion. That's considered a mid cap. But this mutual fund manager is buying stocks from companies that are in that category where if you did this calculation, they'd be considered between 2 and 10 billion mid cap type of companies. And then of course you got small cap. Right there's small cap, usually less than $1 billion, less than 500 million when you do this calculation. Smaller companies. Regional funds, this would be, this mutual fund manager is only buying stocks that companies happen to be in the West or the Midwest or the East, or they're in a region that's growing maybe. Sector funds is a big deal. There was this time where I said, wow, this health industry is really taking off, but I didn't want to take the risk of buying health industry type stocks, so I got into what's called a sector mutual fund to diversify. So by getting into this type of mutual fund, this mutual fund manager in the health sector, we're already buying shares from all the different public companies related to the health sector, and I could just get into that mutual fund and be completely diversified, but yet focused on the health. There was another year where it was real obvious the real estate in this country was going nuts before that bubble popped. And so if you went to a mutual fund where the mutual fund manager is investing in companies that are involved in real estate, you can then hit that sector. Usually if a sector is taking off, being in a sector mutual fund, you have the safety of being diversified, while at the same time you're making much higher than average earnings compared to other mutual funds because you're able to pinpoint the sector that's taking off, like real estate or health. And then socially responsible funds. Back in my day when I was heavily into investing, I always lost money on socially responsible mutual funds. But I think that times have turned now to where socially responsible mutual funds are doing much better than they did in the old days. And this could be a thing, a sector maybe. I consider that kind of a sector itself. Now I opened up a no-load mutual fund family called Vanguard. They're no-load, doesn't cost anything to get in. And I went and said, I want to see your list of mutual funds. And I noticed, look at what they did. They broke them in like different sections. There's 128 that are Vanguards. So out of 128, you can find almost anything you're looking for and avoid that sales fee by going to an investment advisor. And the first section is called money market funds. Money market funds is their equivalent of a savings account. And the only reason you want to go into money market funds is because you haven't decided which mutual funds you want to get into, and you want the money to sit there so you can quickly go online when you are ready and go click, click. And you can get into that mutual fund that same day if you do it before 3 o'clock. Or the next day if you do it after 3 o'clock. So but there is a slight advantage. Usually these money market funds do give you a higher rate of interest on your investment than a savings account at a bank. The bad side is, if you have money in a money market fund, and all of a sudden Vanguard goes, oh, we're going out of business, you don't have that insurance from the government because you weren't in a bank or a credit union. So you're giving up a little bit of safety in trade for a slightly higher rate of return. Let's see, how's it done the last year? For example, this one, Prime Money Market for Vanguard, has done 0.88%, less than 1%. And even though that looks really low, if I had that same money in my credit union, I would not have gotten 0.88. Probably like 0.33 in the last 12 months is all I made. So I'm more than doubling my interest by being in this money market fund, but I have that slight additional risk that I don't have when I'm in a credit union or a bank. Because the credit union or bank money is insured by the government. And if that credit union or bank, something goes wrong, the government's going to make sure you get your money back plus interest. And that's a big deal. I consider that kind of risk-free. Even though there's still a hint of risk, it's the equivalent of risk-free by having it insured by the government. The next section, get past the money markets, bond funds. We're going to skip that for a minute. Get to the next section. Hang on. Where's the next section? Hang on. Hang on. This one. Stock funds. This is what we've been reading about just now. Different names or words you would see in the name of stock funds and what they might mean. Notice right here under asset class, they're using the same exact words that we just read about. Let's see. Large cap. See that stock large cap blend. I'm sure without going and reading the details on this mutual fund that this mutual fund manager is investing in companies whose capitalization calculation, number of shares times the price per share, are over 10 billion. It's a larger companies that this investment manager is going into. Just by that word large cap. You got large cap, large cap, large cap. Looks like they're in order by their asset class. And keep going. Large cap, large cap. Come on. Got some more? Mid cap, mid cap, mid cap. Just like we just read about. Mid-sized companies. If I keep going, I'm sure I'll find small caps down here. Small cap, small cap, small cap. They're offering you now ones, hey, and usually in an up market like we've had, if I were to go look at the 1-year return on all these, the small cap ones should most likely have a higher return on your investment than the mid cap, and the mid cap will probably be slightly higher than the large ones. But on a down market, the most money lost are in the small cap, a little less money lost in the mid cap, and even less money in the large cap. Because usually large cap companies, big companies, are slightly safer investments than the small or the medium. And it kind of goes in that order. I'm just looking now at randomly this one right there. This is how it's done in the last 12 months, as of September 30. Okay, that money market fund was making 0.88%. My savings account, the credit union, is making 0.33%, both less than 1%. But had I been in the small Vanguard, small cap growth index admiral, whatever this is, I would have made 16.5% on my money. 16.5%. That's 16.5 times more than you'd make in the money market because of the risk you're taking. I mean, that's great. To make 16%, think about it. I used to sit in my class when I was a senior, and I used to say, if I could just save $100,000, no, $200,000, and if I could just average 10%, that'd be $20,000 a year, you know? And back then, my expenses were so low because I was a really poor college student, so my rent was really cheap. Boy, I wouldn't have to work. And I was already thinking about how could I not have to work? If I could just get $100,000, if I could just put together some way of getting $100,000, and if I could average 10%, I'm sorry, $200,000. I keep getting that wrong. I'd be making $20,000 a year, and I wouldn't have to work. Don't get me wrong, it takes more than $20,000 now, but back then, and that's how I used to think. Look at this one. If I had all that in there, I'd be making more than 10%. I do want to tell you, back in my day, making 10% was a lot easier than it is today. To be comparison, an average savings account at a bank or credit union, you were making at least 5%, not just 0.3%, 5%. So you can see I was being conservative, saying if I could just average 10%. Well, during that time period when I was trying to save that money, I look back, because I kept everything on spreadsheets. You should always figure out your net worth every month. Not how much is in my savings, net worth. And I did that. And I realized, wow, I'm averaging 15% on all my investments. Some are very conservative, some are risky. But my average for several years was right around 15%. And right now, 15% would be, oh my God, because it's so hard to even make 10%. But back then, it wasn't that hard. So as you can see how it really pays off to take some risk, but make sure you're at least diversifying if you're going to take this much risk, and not just buy one individual stock and another individual stock like you're doing in Investopedia. You're taking the most risk possible, simulated, by doing the investment game. You're buying individual stocks. All right, I want to get into some more names. Now we're going to get into the, where am I? Am I here? Now we're getting into bond funds and some common names from bond funds. The word, if you see the word high yield, that usually means this investment manager's buying bonds from companies that would be rated as junk bonds, which is what, BA and below, or BB, I can't remember, B, AA below, whatever that rating is. Once you get to junk, that's the ones at this one. So it means you're taking a lot of risk, because this investment manager is buying junk bonds. So you should expect a higher rate of return because of that higher risk you're taking. Intermediate corporate bonds. The word intermediate is how much time is still left until that bond matures. So the investment manager is buying bonds, but specifically eyeing bonds that will mature in the next, 5 to 10 years from now. Not brand new ones that mature in 30 years, some that have been out there already for 10, 20 years, and only have 10 to 5 years left. That intermediate on a bond fund is the amount of time most of the bonds that are being bought would mature. Intermediate U.S. bond. The word U.S. means it's those treasury bonds. And treasury bonds always pay a lower interest rate than a corporate bond because you're taking far less risk. You're guaranteed by the government by buying a U.S. treasury bond. You're guaranteed by the corporation by buying a corporate bond. And that corporation could go bankrupt. And we all saw many companies go bankrupt in 2009, 2010 because of the financial crash. Lehman Brothers being the largest bankruptcy in American history ever happened because of the financial crash, started at the end of 2008, went all the way through. Let's see what else we got here. A couple more bond fund names. Long term, that would be because the bonds that this mutual fund manager is buying are maturing in over 10 years, or longer. What about municipal bond mutual fund? This mutual fund manager is buying state and city or township bonds that they're issuing, that are out there on the market because they needed to raise money for a project. Remember the word municipal bonds. By the way, does anybody remember what the advantage was of owning municipal bonds compared to corporate bonds? Huge advantage. What was it? That's right, no taxes. Same with this mutual fund. If a mutual fund has the name municipal in it, it means all the investments in the mutual fund are tax-free, and so is your money in the mutual fund then would be tax-free. So this is one of the mutual funds that you wouldn't have to pay taxes on. Municipal bond mutual fund. Short-term means, just like it says, the amount of time in which the bonds would mature. U.S. short-term U.S. bonds, Treasury short-term maturity date type bonds. So you see these common names. Now here's some other ones. Here's money market. We talked about this already. It's like the equivalent of savings account. Usually the word money market's in the name of the mutual fund somewhere. And then now, balanced. You see the word balanced in the name of a mutual fund. It's not a stock fund. It's not a bond fund. It's a blend. It means that this mutual fund manager this mutual fund is going to own both bonds and stocks. And it's going to be balanced. And asset allocation, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry about that. Just real quick, going back to Vanguard. How are we doing on time? We're good. I'm jumping up now to bond mutual funds, which were way up here, just to look at some of the names of some real ones here. Here's some bond mutual funds. Let's see. Bond intermediate term government. That means that this mutual fund manager is buying bond, U.S. Treasury bonds that are maturing intermediate between, what is that, 5 to 10 years or whatever it is, 10 to 15, whatever intermediate is. You can see why I don't expect you to memorize these. Long term, these are all government bonds. Oh, here's one. Short-term investment, bond short-term investment. The name is Vanguard Short-Term Bond Index Admiral Shares, short-term bond fund. This mutual fund manager is buying bonds that are going to mature within the next 5 years or so. So you can see the names are, any mutual fund, almost all of them have somewhere in their details one of these words that you're learning, which once you get the hang of these, I look at the name of mutual fund and I can tell exactly what kind of investments that mutual fund is going to be into, or that mutual fund manager is focused on. Here's another one, short term. Another one, short term. Here's a long term, intermediate. I wanted to find a municipal. Okay, tax exempt. So right here, state, muni. So here's a bond mutual fund, intermediate, as far as time's concerned, and then it says state muni. This mutual fund manager is buying bonds, municipal bonds from different states that are being issued for whatever projects they need to raise the money for. Not necessarily cities or townships, but states. That's where the word state comes in, which are usually safer than just buying Detroit municipal bonds or Flint municipal bonds, cities. And Detroit went bankrupt and those bondholders only got a small part of their money back. So you can see how much risk is involved even in municipal bonds. So these would all be tax-free because these are all the word munis at the end of their class category here, which means they all would be tax-free. Let me see, there's one more. Balanced funds. All right. All these are balanced, which means all of those mutual funds right there have both, the mutual funds managers buying both stocks and bonds. Not just stocks, not just bonds. A mixture. And if you don't know which way interest rates are going to go in the future, this is a good way to make sure you cover yourself. Remember the golden rule on bonds. I taught it last chapter. If you think interest rates are going to go down in the future, you want to buy bonds or bond mutual funds. If you think that interest rates are going to go up in the future, you want to get rid of your bond mutual funds and not buy bond mutual funds or bonds. And if you don't know which way interest rates are going to go, these balanced funds are the way to go for the unknown. Meaning you have some stocks in case interest rates are going to go up, and your usually stock market starts going well because the economy is growing. And you own bonds just in case the interest rates are going to go down because maybe the economy is slowing down. If you don't know what's going to happen, this is how you kind of cover yourself with a balanced fund. This being diversified. It's like double diversification. Again, lowering your risk. And the returns on these shouldn't be as high. Oh, not bad though. Wait. I'm looking at 1 year, 16.84, 16.86, 16.84. Wow, these aren't doing bad for the last 12 months. That's a pretty high return for being balanced. I want to make sure, look at the 5-year and 10-year. I want to make sure you understand what those mean. If all of a sudden, let me see, can everybody kind of see this? If I said to you, hey, we made 162% in our investment we held for 10 years. Almost always in the investment field, what it made as a percentage over a huge amount of time is never even talked about. It's how much did it make per year over that amount of time. So anytime you see these columns, that is the average per year, not what it made over 10 years or 5 years. You have to take that and divide by time. So 162% divided by 10. Well, I'm going to take 162 divided by 10 equals 16.2%. The average annual return for holding that for 10 years was 16.2%. Some years were a little higher, some years were lower, but over the 10 years, this was the average. And that's what you're seeing when you look at the 5-year and 10-year column. When you look at this 10-year column, I don't have enough examples up there, but does everybody notice how much lower it is than the 5-year or the 1 year or year to date? Year to date means January to September 30th, not even a year. But why is that so low in this 10-year column? Does anybody have a guess? 2008 is included in that 10 year. So much was lost in 2008. No matter how great the market's been the last 5 years, you have to take that year into consideration, which was a huge loss. Probably most of these were probably a negative 30, 40% in that year. So you have to take, if you're doing the average for 10 years, that's why it's so low. Because of that unbelievable bad year that everybody had to experience. So, by the way, the very last item on our list was per year, you can read it, per year or period percentage calculation. You take the total percentage and divide it by however many years the length of time is. To get that per year. Now with that calculation right there. All right, next on the list. We got bond mutual fund name, common names, stock mutual fund common names. You'll have this PowerPoint right there. You'll have those pages in the book with those names. If you had a question on the quiz, and you will, that will say, hey, this bond's mutual fund name, or I'm sorry, this mutual fund name has Oppenheimer Intermediate Corporate Bond Fund. You know, does that mean that this investment manager, and maybe you'll have multiple choice or something, but you got to kind of make sure you have those names available for you for the next quiz. Now, we're going to talk about index funds. So I'm going to slide 11 to start with. Right here, we skipped it when we were talking about the name of stock fund. This is very different than everything we've talked about at this point, called index funds. The index funds almost always have a much lower expense ratio. Now, if you recall from last week when we talked about expense ratio, that's the percent of all the money on an average year that's being used to cover the expenses, the fee of the mutual fund managers, any advertising, stamps, staff, whatever is involved. And does anybody remember the benchmark that I used to use, or that I advise that you should, that kind of shows that the mutual fund manager is not wasting money? What was it? Less than 1%. That I would never consider a mutual fund has an expense ratio over 1%, because it usually means that mutual fund manager is wasting money or getting overpaid or whatever it be for the size of the portfolio they're managing. And it's more money for the investors if it's the lower that number is. Well, index funds happen to have usually a very low expense ratio. And the reason is there's very little work that a mutual fund manager has to do that's managing an index fund. Because an index fund mirrors some kind of index. And what I mean by mirroring, let's say, let me get to Yahoo Finance's main page. Here's three different indexes right here: the S&P 500, the Dow 30, the Dow Index, and the NASDAQ. And let's say this mutual fund mirrors the Dow. The mutual fund manager would go and see how the index is calculated. It's the top 30 companies in our country, and their average prices up and down percentages for that moment. And that's how that index. So today, is the market closed? Not yet. So far, the top 30 companies in our country's shares have gone up about 0.75% in prices so far today. So that means if there were a index fund called the Dow Index Fund, Vanguard, that mutual fund manager just goes, what companies are the top 30? And how is this calculated? And they mirror it. Okay, I'm taking everybody's mutual fund money now, and I'm going to invest in exactly those companies at exactly the proportions that make up the Dow. And if this Dow goes up, now it's up 0.76 instead of 75. That index fund is up 0.76 because it mirrors it. The mutual fund managers on a regular stock mutual fund are staring at a screen, looking for opportunities, and they're buying and selling, making decisions every minute from 9:30 to 4 o'clock. As much as their whole goal is, how do I make more money than the Dow? Because why would somebody want to spend money to have me manage their money in this big pool when they could just go into this one and mirror the Dow? So a mutual fund manager almost always says, I have to beat that. However the overall index is doing, I got to beat it, or I'm not earning my money. Because I'm going to use all this training, all this knowledge, all this schooling to make better decisions than just mirroring the Dow. I'm looking for opportunities for my investors. And the more money their investors make, the more money the manager makes. And so a lot of people say, look, I don't want to rely on a manager deciding what to buy and sell. I just want to be in the market and I want to be diversified, so they'll go to an index fund. And the advantage is that the fees being charged to all those who are in the index fund are a lot lower. And so instead of an expense ratio of 0.8%, which is under 1%, and I said this would probably be a good investment, mutual fund manager is not really wasting money, it's under 1%. But an index fund, you're going to see like 0.4% or 0.2%, because the mutual fund manager isn't getting paid a ton of money because there's very few decisions to be made. They're just watching the Dow. Oh, look, the Dow is changing. They've taken this company out and they brought this company in. The mutual fund manager of an index fund, I'm going to sell that company's shares and buy this company's shares because they mirror the Dow. And there's really no thinking to be done. So that's the advantage of an index fund. It's just like a mutual fund, but it's mirroring an index. And another advantage real quick is that's more money for investors because so much less is being spent on expenses. All right, now, whoops, there was another slide, slide 18, let me see. Whoop, wait, hang on, get back here. What is going on? What is going on here? Oh, come on. Are you kidding? Is this whole thing going to close? What? Oh, I just hit the wrong, nothing, it's completely locked up. Nope. Come on. Maybe if I hit the right button. Okay, I'm going to slide 18 real quick. There's something on here. What does this say? Index fund is a fund that invests in securities containing a specific index, like the S&P 500. I use the Dow. Could use S&P. Could use NASDAQ. The decision to invest in a managed fund versus index fund depends on your research. So that's all it says. But let's see. Now I want to go all the way up to slide 5. This is something I put off because a lot of people kind of go, "What that?" Now remember, out of all the mutual funds that are out there, whether it's no loads or through an investment advisor that does charge a fee called loads, these type of funds are a very small percent, called closed-end funds and exchange-traded funds. ETFs is the nickname. You'll hear that a lot if you're ever watching the news. financial news of any kind. ETF, this ETF did this ETF. Exchange traded funds. In this case, these mutual funds, the first investors get in and they have a cap. And once it reaches that cap, no other new investors are allowed in the mutual fund. And now the only way to get into this mutual fund is to buy shares from somebody who owns shares who wants to sell them, just like stock. And you buy and sell shares on the exchange, New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, just like you would shares of stock. And the prices of closed-end and exchange-traded funds are not based on net asset value that I taught you last week. They're based on supply and demand, whatever somebody's willing to pay for it, just like a stock, just like a common share of stock. How the price goes up and down based on somebody either wanting it or not wanting it. These are the same way. And that's the difference between these mutual funds and all the rest, is that the price isn't based what that mutual fund's worth. It's based on whatever it can sell for, whatever someone's willing to pay, just like a common share of stock. And the price goes up and down every second instead of at the end of one day. All the other mutual funds, the price is based at the end of the day, once a day. This one, the price changes every second, just like a stock. And these, closed-end and ETFs, the prices change all day long, every second, and you can only get them on an exchange. What are we doing on time? We gotta go to our in-class assignment. Let's do it. Got 2 problems. You got 14 minutes. I want to know the net asset value of that first mutual fund at the top, Fidelity Equity Mutual Fund. What's the word equity mean? I heard it. Equity. What do I know about this mutual fund if it has the word equity in it? That the mutual fund manager probably buys stocks. Not, if it said equity income, it'd be given stocks, but stocks, equity means this mutual fund buying stocks. And there's net asset value. Number 2, the investor purchased Vanguard Global Growth Fund. Global. Okay, this fund doesn't charge a front-end load, but it does charge a contingent deferred sales load of 4.5% for any withdrawals in the first 5 years. This investor withdraws $4,000 a year 2. How much will the contingent deferred sales load, the back-end load, be? Calculate how much the fee would be, the commission, not how much the check would be, how much the commission would be on that one. These are 2 pretty easy calculations. It's just you got to get started and help each other. Do not do this alone. To help somebody with the first problem before you go on to the second one, help somebody in your group with the first one.